Welcome back to another 2D to 3D video. I am Follygon, and in this video I'm going to show you my entire digital character sculpting process on this nerdy librarian. Click that subscribe button if you're new around here, and check out my Gumroad link below for courses, tutorials, and my custom brushes. And if you want to learn how I do everything in this video, check out the Appeal Academy. Here's some of my students' work that have gone through the program. And you know that October's right around the corner, which means it's once again time for Sculptober, a month-long art challenge where artists from around the world get together and sculpt something new every day of the month. Join the challenge and find out more at sculptober.com. So this time around, I'm working on this cute librarian inspired by the artwork of NanFam at ZavaniArt on Instagram. I'll be turning this 2D concept into 3D using ZBrush, created here on my Cintiq tablet that lets me digitally sculpt my characters starting from something as simple as a sphere. This early part of the process is referred to as the blockout. You can think of this like creating your pre-planning sketch or your line art for a 2D illustration. It's pretty much the same basic idea. We are planning for the future, laying down our foundation. This part of the process is often rough, fast, messy, and sometimes a little alien. Things can get a little awkward during this stage, as I'm sure you will soon see. I really like to just focus on big shapes that affect the silhouette. So as you can see, I'm placing in the ears and beginning to sculpt the basic form that will represent my hair. But after I get all that main stuff into position, I then go back and start thinking about my facial features at least a little bit. The face is so complicated, and it's going to be the most time-consuming part of this character, that I'm definitely going to need to do a lot of that pre-planning work now to make sure that I can save myself some time later. There's some of that crazy or awkward alien stuff that I was mentioning during the early stages of sculpting. I would say that this is almost inevitable. You always have some awkward growing pains during these early parts. But if you muscle through it, things can start feeling better pretty quick. You'll notice that I have a simple line in place for the character's mouth. Although that is a really simple, quick brush stroke that just represents some of the form, it really helps me to just figure out proportions and where things are going to live on the face. This is really important for figuring out the proportions and landmarks for the rest of my face. After creating those really hard, kind of blocky shapes, I then go back over top of everything and do what's called a smoothing pass. This is when I start to take those sharp edges and blend them out and make them feel a little softer. This is to start pushing in the direction of making everything feel more organic. After doing a smoothing pass, it's then time to go through and start blending a lot of these pieces together. You'll notice I don't blend areas like the neck into the body, keeping the head separate from that. That's really important as we move forward and need to independently control the resolution of these different areas. A really common beginner mistake is thinking that you need to combine everything, when in fact it's typically easier to do the exact opposite. Now for the beginning portion of our hair. Hair is always one of the most difficult parts of character creation. It is big, it is complex, it can sometimes be just completely overwhelming, and that is why I prefer to get started really early on my hair, much like I do with my character with these really rough blockouts, going in and making sure that I'm at least creating every single part. Even though it's not necessarily refined, I have it there later so that I can come back to it and continue to push it even further. Painting your characters early on can be extremely helpful for a number of reasons. It really helps me make my character feel like it's starting to come alive, and it's also really helpful for landmarks. During this part of the process, I typically overpaint things. As you can see, I'm making the area around the eyes extremely dark. I'm adding some really saturated reds to the cheeks, but after I do that, then I go back over top of everything and start to paint out most of that color. This is to simply make sure that I'm not downplaying those colors and I'm giving them enough exaggeration. Here I am working on the body, beginning to push on that, starting to refine these shapes, blend some different areas together for the shoulders, for the two parts of the general ribcage form and the torso, using Dynamesh at this stage, which is a Boolean geometry tool. It also dynamically, hence the name Dynamesh, can dynamically update the resolution of your geometry. So a very helpful tool for a lot of reasons. You'll be seeing me use that a lot as we progress. For the shirt, a simple mask and extraction, and then we're off to creating the book. She can't be a nerdy librarian, right, without her book that she's gonna be reading over top of. This was poly-modeled here in ZBrush. A lot of people prefer to poly-model in different software. I'm a big fan of ZBrush in the tool set here though, so I just use this for pretty much everything. Here I am going through with what is called the Z Modeler brush. That is the poly-modeling tool in ZBrush, using that to go through and create the individual shapes that are going to make up this book. So I've created a large chunk of form for the pages instead of going through and creating a million individual pages. Well, maybe not a million, but hundreds of individual pages. So a big chunk there to represent that, and then just a few individual pages on top to help drive visual interest there. And then I go back over top of that large, chunkier form of pages using what are called Boolean Operations. I use this to subtract a few cut shapes. As you can see, I'm using some cubes and some custom brushes, which are of course available over on my Gumroad if you are interested. But I'm using these to create negative Boolean shapes to subtract from that larger form and create a few additional areas of visual interest. I know we go through this stuff pretty quickly, but for reference, that book took me about 45 minutes to make. So there's our beautiful book scaled, proportionally placed in front of our character, and we'll do some more with posing here very soon. I talked a lot about how I needed to go through and make the face feel more soft and organic, which kind of begs the question, why am I creating all these hard lines on the face again? There is this area of the face that's extremely difficult, this sharp corner pulling out for the cheek. You can see it right there. It's really sharp and really difficult to make in 3D. Look at that thing. Look how much that is sticking out. Seriously, how do you make that thing work? I end up playing with that a lot moving forward, but I'll be talking about that more once I start refining on the face and getting that to a more finished level. After some quick paint for the eyes, I'm going to move on to working on this hair and starting to go away from that blocked out, nasty, rough, kind of inorganic stage to something that feels like it has a little more flow and rhythm. So this involves going over pretty much everything. At this stage, I'm still being pretty rough with my brush strokes, but I'm beginning to plan for what the final hairstyle is going to look like. Oh, and of course, don't forget to put things like eyelashes and eyebrows on your character really early on. They help drive expression, and without them, your character can feel pretty dull and weird, and you might not know why. This is probably why. One of the most, if not the most difficult part of this character was the braid for the hair. She's got like these pigtail braids shooting off to the side. This is how I ended up coming up with a way to make this work. It's probably not the best way to do it, but it is the only way that I could mentally get in here and understand exactly what I needed to do. So I took these cylinders, and as you can see, I'm actually kind of braiding these cylinders one over the top of another. I know it looks really awkward at first, but then I go back over top of that, smooth it out, start to blend it. There are brushes that you can get that will create a braid for you, but this is the only way I could make this physically accurate for something that's going to be a custom shape. So after I braided those together in the exact shape that I needed, matching my reference, I went over top, inflated, started to get some of that taper, began to place that on the head. This is honestly, it might be going by really fast, but this part took me quite a while. This was extremely difficult, but I didn't want to just create a braid using some brush that I could download. I needed it to be bespoke for this character, so to speak. I needed it to match the reference for the, same hairstyle, having the exact same number of segments and taper. For the hair tie, it's just a simple cylinder. You'll see me do stuff like this all the time where I'll create an illusion of thickness rather than actually create it. And then go back over top of the form for that braid that I was working on, beginning to make that even more refined, cleaning up my forms and my edges, and just try to make that as clean as I possibly could. There it is on the head, just working on proportions a little more, mainly using my move brush and smoothing that out to make it feel more organic. Time to make a mouth for this character. She hasn't had one for a little while. She's just had a simple line there. And that is because the illustration that I am referencing, that's all that's there, is a singular line representing the form of the mouth. So in that kind of situation, you have to ask yourself, what are you gonna do to represent that in 3D? You could represent that with a simple line, or you could create a little additional form. I'm going the route of sculpting lips for the character, sculpting an entire mouth. I go back in after working on that form and refine it more, but getting down the basic shape is what I need here initially, creating some simple paint, and we'll play with proportions a little more as we continue forward here. But kind of having experience, I've sculpted a ton of mouths. If you're interested in sculpting lips and learning how to do that, I have a great tutorial here on my channel. I think it's only a minute long, and it'll teach everything you need to know about how to create that form. After creating the mouth, getting that, into the proper place, I start to notice that some other things could use more refinement. That's typically what happens when you let one area kind of fall to the wayside and not do anything with it for a long time. So I typically try to keep things at around the same level of finish. Here with the mouth though, I kind of let that ride on the back burner because I wasn't exactly sure what I was gonna do there. But if you do that, make sure that you go back and start to refine everything else and get it to about the same level. Something I've been doing a lot more here with my characters is posing early on in the process. I have found that I actually work a lot faster on my characters when I pose early, which sounds counterintuitive, right? If you have the ability to work symmetrically, you would think you'd want to stay that way for as long as possible. And I would have agreed with you a number of years ago, but I have found in my own experience that by posing early, I can actually get to that semi-finished stage a lot faster and then not have to worry about re-sculpting as much when I go to pose that character later. For this character's hands, much like many of my characters, I use a hand that I have sculpted in the past. I have, I think 3 or 4 base hands that I kind of float between depending on the character. As you can see, I have a closed fist up underneath the cheek that we'll look at more in depth here in just a moment. But I use those to save time. Hands can be pretty time consuming and I don't want to sculpt that from scratch every single time. I love sculpting hands, they're very expressive and fun to do, but if you have a way that you can speed up your workflow with that, I definitely recommend using it. There's our librarian, nice and bald there as I work on the body. If you can make your character look good while they are bald without any hair, I think you're doing a pretty good job on the face. But of course, every face needs some freckles. That is the artist tip of the video maybe. If you want to make your character more cute, more interesting, just freckles. Just add some freckles on there, come on. That's the secret to every good character. Appeal, it's called freckles. Try it out. Oh, and for the eyes, instead of painting the shape to be more oval shaped, I just took the geometry for what I already had and squished it and adjusted the proportions to make that look more similar to the reference. Now, I do make a lot more changes to the face as I continue forward, but I was ready to break symmetry on that and start pushing forward to pose this character even more. Luckily, in ZBrush, there's this little thing called Posable Symmetry. It's up in your transform menu where all your symmetry settings are, and you can use that to symmetrically work on your face, even when it's not aligned with the symmetrical axis. If you guys are unfamiliar with that or have never played around with it before, I highly recommend checking it out. And now on to that closed hand that she's resting her chin on. For this, It definitely took a lot of work, a lot more than the other hand, so I wanted to show off some of the process for that here. I keep the fingers separate from the mesh initially of the palm because that makes it way easier to work on and get your fingers into position. But eventually here, as you will see, I merge all of that together so that I can begin blending and making that feel more cohesive. For this character, because I wasn't super concerned with it, I just went ahead and Dynameshed the whole thing together. This can be a little difficult to work with, and it can kind of get messy if you're not used to working this way, so do be careful blending your fingers together, because once you do that, it's pretty difficult to go back from there. So only do that if you're confident that you can fix it later if you need to. The other hand was much more simple, just involved some proportional changes and some shape language changes to get that feeling more like the other hand and feeling more like the original artwork. Do be careful with base meshes, as you can kind of get stuck with what you have and not progress super quick. I recommend going quick and just trying to mess things up as early as possible so that you can get to that finished result more quickly. Here are a few extra details being added to the clothing to push that to a more refined level. Here's something really cool that's a little more complicated. For the hair to blend the braids into the main section of the hair, I duplicated them and went over top sculpting and blending those forms together. But I kept the original mesh and shrunk that inside of the other and created a really clean blend between those two areas. So now I get the best of both worlds, where I have a really clean, separate looking mesh that has these sharp edges between the different forms, and I also have that blending into the main chunk of the hair. This can be a little time consuming and it takes a deft hand, but with some practice, I know you can do it too. For the book, it was feeling a little stiff and boring, so I gave that another pass, just detailing out some areas like the pages, starting to curl some of those forms, as well as make the spine and the whole book feel more aged. The table for the book was pretty fun. I just took a simple brush to kind of carve in here to the surface and began creating some brush strokes. You can do this with a standard brush, a Damien standard brush. I recommend being pretty messy with it, and then you can go back over top of things with a trim brush and start to flatten out some of the forms where you exaggerate them. You can even use morph brushes, if you're familiar with those, to help downplay a lot of those forms as well. Now adding some simple paint to the shirt, separating that darker brown from the purple section. And then some polish on our face. This is when I go back over pretty much everything. Right now I'm doing some painting, but of course I go back in and start to soften some of these forms and push that to be as good as possible. I check on my render angle from time to time, making sure that the silhouette is still reading well. Things like this question mark shape of hair on top of the head have to look good and be readable, and sometimes you have to cheat that kind of stuff a little when you have a 2D illustration that doesn't always work from every possible angle in 3D. Very common for that to happen. And then of course, little things that I may or may not have forgotten. I did it, so I didn't forget it, right? Creating the nose bridge for the glasses there to finish things up. And now, of course, for the part that so many skip to here at the end, the final renders. Hey skippers, glad to see you, but if you like what you see, I think you'll also really enjoy learning more about the process of how I made this character. Consider going back through and giving it a watch if you did just so happen to skip here to the end. I know I caught you, but I want to let you know that there's no hard feelings between us either way. I appreciate you checking out my art. Speaking of, if you want to learn more about digital sculpting, check out my Gumroad link below for my courses, tutorials, and my custom brushes. If you want to learn how I did everything in this video, check out the Appeal Academy. Here's some of my students' work that have gone through the program. And once again, a quick shout out here for Sculptober. It's coming up very soon. This is a month-long art challenge where artists from around the world get together and sculpt something new every day of the month. You can join the challenge and find out more at sculptober.com. And I'd like to give another huge shout out here at the end to Nan Fam. Definitely go check out more of their art at Zavani Art on Instagram. If you're new around here, click that subscribe button, and if you enjoyed the video, click that like button. I appreciate you so much, thank you for watching, and I'll see you again here in the next 2D to 3D video.